Summer holds a lot of back and forth and everywhere and travel, and kids are out of school and we're out of our normal routine. And so it can really be a time of spreading out, it seems like. But I thought for this summer, as I prayed about what we wanted to talk about on the podcast, I thought if we could just focus in a little bit on the podcast this summer on service. And I'm calling it our Summer of Service series. What God is doing, how God is using people to further his kingdom, how people are spreading cheer or the joy of Jesus through the way that they are serving and loving others. And my prayer is that by having these conversations with others, all of us would be encouraged as well. So my hope is that wherever you are today, as you're listening, if you're in the car, or if you're at home, if you're at a park with kids, that you will feel Jesus encouraging and calling you to love those around you and to spread his cheer and his joy wherever you go. Welcome to the Choosing Cheer podcast, the show about the joy of Jesus in all of life's moments. I'm your host, Nicolet Bell, and my hope is that you'll see his joy is not dependent on circumstances, but rooted in his presence. Let's go there together. Hey friends, welcome back to the Choosing Cheer podcast. I am so excited today because we have a special guest. Emily Wierenga is on the podcast with us today. Emily is an author and a philanthropist and just a servant of Jesus. And I have been captivated by her story. And so I can't wait for you to get to know her as she exhibits the joy of Jesus. And that is what we are going to talk about today. Emily, why don't you start by just telling our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Okay, I'm 43 years old. I live in northern Alberta, Canada, on a farm with my husband and my 3 kids. I'm a writer, a snowboarder, a painter. We have bees and chickens, and we make our own maple syrup, and used to have a car that ran off of vegetable oil. So that tells you a little bit about ourselves. We're very much do-it-yourselves people. I have the privilege of partnering with many amazing people around the world in impoverished countries who don't have much of like the material things, but they have so much of the spiritual. And I have realized, and I know it sounds cliche, but they really have the joy of the Lord. And in doing this work where I don't actually get any kind of compensation, and that's by choice, I too have the joy of the Lord. There's nothing material that I'm getting from doing this. It's just purely the Lord is my portion, the Lord is my reward. And there are hard days, for sure. And there are days when I want to give up. But overall, the joy of the Lord is my strength, and he is sustaining me. And I'm just so grateful.
In this season of the podcast, we're talking about choosing cheer in life's everyday, ordinary moments, kind of exactly what you were just talking about living life on your farm. But you see this also in your ministry, Emily. And I want you to tell us a little bit about your organization and how you see the joy of Jesus in your work.
Okay, so I never planned to start a nonprofit. It was not at all an ambition of mine. I am a writer. I was very focused on getting my name out there, getting famous. I just thought that's the way, we're supposed to do things in this world. We're supposed to make ourselves into something and our name into something. And that was my focus. So in 2014, I kind of reached one of my goals was to be able to travel internationally on a bloggers team. And I was invited January of 2014 to travel to Uganda and Rwanda on this bloggers team. And it just was something that I was super happy about for my selfish reasons. And I got there, and I think within the first day, I was completely shattered. It felt like coming home because as a kid, I actually grew up in the Congo and Nigeria. I was a missionary's kid for a few years. At 3, we moved back to Canada. So when I went back to Africa, it was like returning home, and I saw people that felt like my family, and they were hurting and they were impoverished, and yet they were full of joy. And it was such uh, an eye opener, a perspective shifter for me. This pastor's kid, this missionary kid who thought I knew the gospel, and I got there and I was just wrecked. I was wrecked by my own selfishness. And I was so burdened to know this joy that they had. I'm like, how can I? It felt like that treasure, that the parables talk about, that pearl. I went home and I just gave up everything. I stopped marketing my books, which is really bad, but like I couldn't care less about that. I didn't care about that. I cared about these precious mothers who couldn't even feed their children. And I'm like, what am I doing with my life? I say I'm a Christian, but I'm not living for Christ. I'm living for myself. I've got self on a platform. I've got self on a pedestal. And so for months, I just wept before the Lord. It was like true intercessory prayer, just broken. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I understood my purpose. And yet I had nothing. I didn't know what to do with it. So it was distinctly a calling that came upon my life during those months. I really did feel the Spirit say, I've called you to this. And yet I didn't know what this was. I knew that I, as a mom, wouldn't know how to handle having someone come in and take my children because I couldn't afford to feed them. And then yet this is what I saw many Western organizations doing. They were coming in and taking these children to children's homes because the moms couldn't afford to feed them. Maybe their husband had just passed away from AIDS or, terrible, terrible things. And they were working so hard, but because of injustice, they couldn't make enough. They couldn't make as much as the men in their country, so they couldn't feed their kids. So I'm like, why are we just giving? Because I myself had a sponsor child at the time who was in a children's home, and he had a mom who came and visited me. And when he looked up at me, his eyes were shining because I was providing for him. I wanted him to look at his mom that way, and so I was just really broken. And over time, the Lord just began to tell me what to do. And it was the beginning of a very intimate relationship with him. He told me the name of the ministry. He gathered people to me to help me. And slowly we just began to serve mothers in Uganda. And it's now spread to 8 countries, but that's all him. We're still a very small ministry. We don't ask anyone for money. We just go to the Lord in prayer every month, asking him to fill up our bank account and then asking him how to steward it wisely. So he has directed us these past 10 years.
Tell us just a little bit more about what you do on the ground with Lulu Tree.
Okay, so we come alongside mothers predominantly through the local church, and we ourselves don't do it. We are in the background. We don't want to be white saviors. And what I mean by that is I don't want to be a representation of the West coming in and offering salvation to those in another country. I want to see Africa helping Africa and Asia helping Asia. That is what I'm passionate about because they know their people best. They just need the tools. They have the vision, they have the passion, they have the knowledge. In fact, when I went to Africa, they helped me. They gave me the treasure. So I'm a strong believer that we go to receive and we give the little that we have as well. And together we share and we build God's kingdom together. The Lord leads us to a faithful man or woman of God in that country. And then we partner with them to help a number of mothers at a time. And we provide those mothers with a sustainable project. So we find out what their passion is, what they want to do to serve their kids. Some choose tailoring, some choose goats, some decide to start a little shop and they sell women's clothes or food. Some begin a catering business. And then paired with that is a discipleship program. So we want them to know who they are in Christ so they can raise their kids up, of course, to know who they are in Christ.
That's so beautiful. Yeah. That is so beautiful. And the story of how you got there is so beautiful, of just obedience and looking at the situation that you were put in and not just walking away from it. So often we can be put in certain situations. God lines up for us to be in a certain place at a certain time. And sometimes we just walk away from it and we miss what God is wanting to do with us and in us in those moments. And you just didn't in that story. You wrestled with him and you did the hard work and you asked the hard questions, and it changed you completely and changed the trajectory of your walk with Jesus. And that is so beautiful. And that's a testimony that can encourage so many wherever they might find themselves on their road or their journey.
I wanted to add something that just came to me, because maybe a listener, is struggling with miscarriage at this time. But my husband and I had been trying for a while at that point when I went on the bloggers trip. We had been trying because we had felt the Lord speak a little girl over us. We had 2 boys. We had taken in 2 boys as foster boys for a year. And then when they were reconnected with their mom, we felt the Lord speaking a little girl over us. And so we began, and we conceived right away, but then we lost our baby. And so for a year after that, we were trying. And so when I went to Uganda, I actually would not have been able to go. It was the exact month that I should have been giving birth to that first baby. And so I wouldn't have even been able to go. I would have missed out on this entire gift that the Lord had for me. But I will tell you, it was the hardest year of my life, waiting on the Lord to fulfill his promise to us for that little girl. But in the meantime, he was still working out his purposes. And so sometimes we can wonder where he is, in the waiting. But I've discovered that joy is in the waiting, because, it develops hope. As we wait upon the Lord, he renews our strength. He gives us that hope. He gives us a chance to need him more than anything in this world. So don't despair in the waiting.
The joy of the Lord is our strength. Emily, you and I have that story of loss in common, and we actually have talked about it before on the podcast, so it's so appropriate that you would bring that part of your story. Thank you for sharing that with us as a part of your journey. I think that, this work that you're doing with the Lulu Tree is so wonderful and inspiring, and how you're making a difference and saying, it's not about me, it's about God and these women, and allowing these women to do what God made them to do, to take care of their kids for themselves. And that's so beautiful and so different. But you also have a new book coming out that you write about this and share about your story. And I had the privilege of getting to read it early, and I'm just captivated by your story. And in the opening of your book, which is entitled The God Who Became Bread, you write this section, and it has just stuck with me. So if you are okay with it, I'm going to read it, and then I want to hear kind of the backstory or response to what you wrote here. You write, "This is a story born from many mistakes. It's also a story about a God who never makes mistakes, and how much he loved the woman who made them, and she him. I am that woman. I don't have all the answers, but I know the one who does." This is so powerful, Emily. How does this statement sum up or guide us to the story that you tell in your new book?
It's easy to look at someone especially someone who's doing, humanitarian work, and think, oh, they're such a good person. And I just want to say I'm not a good person, and God is good. And I am like Mary Magdalene. Jesus said she has been forgiven much, so she loves much. I know the depths that He's called me from. I know what I'm
Mm.
capable of, in a bad way, and yet He has transformed me from the inside out. And so only He can get the glory for anything in those pages about Lulu Tree or my personal testimony. It's all because of Him. And not saying that I don't make mistakes anymore, but I think the more He empties you, the more He can fill you up with love. And that's what He's done in my life.
What a beautiful testimony. So in your book, Emily, you go on and you really emphasize the importance of table, and it's woven throughout the story that you tell. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? I gather from the book there was a time that you didn't experience joy or cheer around the table, and now God has redeemed and restored that for you, as I read about your family enjoying and sharing meals on your farm now. So how did you allow God to do that work in you?
Yeah, so food is a big part of my story. I am a pastor's kid, as you know, and you kind of live in glass walls as a pastor's kid. Anyone in ministry, the walls are glass. And I grew up in a house that taught you that you were seen and not heard, especially at the dinner table. We had moved 10 times by the time I turned 7. I'm an oldest child, and we were homeschooled. I didn't have really any friends. And when I was around 7, a neighbor lady came to our house, and I heard her say, "My, she's such a big girl." And she said it in a way that wasn't like, "Oh, you're such a big girl." It was like, "Oh, she's such a big girl." So a combination of things. When we were in Africa, I just remember as a little girl, and I can see it in the photos too, the joy that my dad felt in ministry. When we returned to Canada, ministry became all consuming, and it felt like we lost him to ministry. And even when, I would wait for him on the stairs after my bath. I would wait to see him, and he would come home late, and he wouldn't see me sitting there, and he'd just go into the office, and I would cry myself to sleep. And after a while, I stopped waiting, and then I stopped eating. I'm not saying it's my dad's fault. He was doing the best he could. It's just I had a very big heart. I felt things very deeply. And then when I was around 8, I lost an elderly lady who had become very dear to me. She died, and I hadn't experienced death before that. And it was more than I could take. So I didn't know about anorexia nervosa. I didn't know about, planned starvation, or I just knew that Mom dished up all of our meals for us. They didn't let me speak, and we had to go to church, and it felt like we had no say over our lives. And so I chose to stop eating. It was a slow stop. It began with just saying no to things like peanut butter on my bread or whatever, and then it began, to be half a piece of bread, and then it's like no bread. I'll just have, an apple, and like it spread over 4 years from 9 to 13. And at first I really, felt in control. And by 13, I was dying. The nurses, I was hospitalized, and the nurses said I was a miracle. I did not feel like a miracle. My hair was falling out. I was blue from hypothermia. I was 60 pounds. I had totally stopped eating. And the anorexia had control over me. I felt like I was a prisoner to it. And when they said I was a miracle, I just began to hear the voice of my Heavenly Father, who had been waiting for me, and I hadn't seen him, and he began to fill me up with his love, and I began to just see who I was through his eyes. And I did relapse as a young married woman. I relapsed into anorexia for a few years. At this point, I knew what I was doing. I knew that I was starving myself. I had not totally dealt with my father issues. So marriage kind of brought them back with having a new, man in my life. And again, after 3 years of being married, it got to the point where I was just drinking 12 cups of coffee a day, and I had a little bit for supper, and I was a wreck. And so I remember the day we were driving home, and my husband and I were fighting in the car, and I was at the wheel, and I started to turn the car into oncoming traffic. And he grabbed the wheel and pulled us over, and he's like, "What are you doing?" And I just was sobbing. And he said, "Emily, I love you, but I can't do this anymore." He said, "You need to make a choice. You need to choose between me and food. Because if it's food, then I'm out." And it sounds really harsh, but it wasn't. It was the best thing for me. I needed that choice because choice all along had been what I wanted, right? That freedom to choose. And he gave that to me. And so I chose him, obviously, and we moved to South Korea, and just to teach English and get away from, Canada for a while. And I learned how to eat again, and I learned to forgive my dad again, and I learned to be a wife. And that's when I began to pray for the Lord to give me a heart for becoming a mom, because I didn't want kids. I didn't want to surrender my body to the unknowns of pregnancy. And meanwhile, my mom got really sick with brain cancer. And so my dad was asking me to watch her over webcam while he could go to a ministerial meeting. So I'm sitting there in South Korea watching my mom, making sure she doesn't fall out of her chair. I'm like, what am I going to do? I'm in South Korea. I'm like, I have to go home. I have to go home and take care of my mom. And so my dear husband totally agreed, let me go. He finished our contract. So I went and I moved back in with my parents for a few months, until we could buy a house near them. And I began to serve my mom. And it was hard, it was hard to move back in with my parents, but it was such a rebirth. And I found such joy in washing her feet, in feeding her, in helping her get changed, and just helping her do daily things. And that is when I began to learn the joy in serving others. It was through serving my mom. At the time, I was still, Lulu Tree hadn't started. I hadn't even had kids, but it was the beginning, of surrender.
Yeah, what a beautiful story. And God brought that image of the table, full story for you in your book. And so I want everybody to get a copy and read about it. You can pre-order your copy now, so you could get it as soon as it comes out, and you can hear kind of the completion of that, and just how God restored that image in you. So Emily, as we wrap up our conversation today, just when you think about that joy that you see, when you went to Africa, you saw that joy and you said, I want that. And then over the years, God has restored that in you. Maybe for that person who's listening today and wondering, I'm not experiencing joy in my life right now. What tips do you have for somebody who wants more joy in their life?
Begin to serve someone. That is my tip. Get out of your own headspace and find someone that you can help. I used to not want to go to heaven. I had no desire. I wanted to live on forever. And when I began to pray, Lord, please make me long for heaven, because right now it's not something I really want. And he said, then your life is too easy. Think about the ones who are suffering. Think about how they long for heaven. And I think sometimes we need to step into their shoes. We need to go and find someone who needs help, who needs kindness. And then we begin to be reminded of the gospel and the reason we're here on earth. If we're surrounded by comfort and by everything we want in ourselves, it's easy to not need Jesus at all. It's easy to associate joy with, temporary pleasures. It reminds me of the, dying of the seed. The seed, in order to burst into a harvest or a crop, needs to die first in the soil. And we need to say no to ourselves and die to ourselves and say, Jesus, how can I help your world? How can I give of myself today? There was one time in Ontario where I was serving my mom, and we had our own house at the time. And I had become very focused on being a journalist and a writer and getting my name out there. And so I was like, Lord, what do you want me to do today? In all of my piety, I was asking God what he wanted me to do before I went and tried to get my name out there. And he said, Emily, I want you to call your mom and go and have tea with her. And I was like, that was not what I was wanting you to say. He just wanted me to have tea with her. And now that she's in heaven, I treasure those times when I had tea with my mom. But at the time, I thought it was all about me, like how to, further my kingdom. It's his kingdom come, his will be done. And that's where you'll find your joy.
And I think it's important for our listeners to know that for some of us, it will be going to Uganda and seeing that poverty. Mm-hmm. It's also opening our eyes to the poverty that is right around us all the time. And if we don't have the opportunity to get on a plane and go somewhere, that we need to just look across the tracks or across into downtown and our surrounding cities, into the Delta here in Mississippi, that we're opening our eyes to the poverty that's right around us. And we can just start there.
One of my greatest joys is going to a local mental health drop-in center where I lead Bible study each week, and just singing with them and hearing their stories. These are drug addicts. These are homeless people. And I don't believe you should serve overseas until you serve locally. Start local. Find a single mom who needs groceries brought to her once a week. Find a shut-in elderly person who needs a book read to them, or shovel their walks, or, there's so many ways that we can care for our neighbors.
Josie and I, when she was really little, started going to Chick-fil-A at lunch, because I found if you went a little bit before the lunch rush, there was a lot of people, elderly people who lived alone, that would come out to eat Chick-fil-A, and they would eat it inside because they're from a generation that you don't eat in your car, you don't eat on the go. And so they were all inside. And so I just found by us just being there, if we would walk into the restaurant, we would stop by a table and visit with one of them. And then another person would come by and stop at our table and visit with her. And the joy that she brought these people who lived at home by themselves was just so cool to watch. And that just really simple way of just stopping to talk to somebody instead of running straight to my table made just such a you could tell it just made their day. It was really, really neat to see. So it doesn't have to be complicated, friends. Just start somewhere, look around you, ask God. You hear Emily talking in this episode. I just asked God this. I heard him tell me this. That comes from daily conversation with him in prayer and in reading his word. So ask God, and we believe that he will answer you and send you in the right way of where he wants you to serve. Emily, it's been such a privilege to have you on the show today. Friends, we want you to get out and get her book. And we just thank you, Emily, for sharing your story with all of us.
Thanks for having me.
Friends, it's my honor and privilege to get to spend time with you week after week. It is such a joy that you would choose to be a part of our conversation here on the podcast. You are such an important part of what we do. If you like what you hear, I would invite you to share it, pass it along, text this episode to a friend, like, rate, and subscribe to our show. What you do makes a difference. And remember, friend, we're cheering you on.